Christmas is coming, bringing Christmas mood alone. As always, I'd like to experiment with some new types of Christmas decoration. Last year I was impressed and fascinated with this model of Christmas tree. I will share the link to my source of inspiration. A year after, I've dared to try and weave such a Christmas tree. I hope those who haven't mastered the technique yet will find our tutorial helpful. I've thought of a few possible applications for this Christmas tree. First of all, a traditional bottle decoration. I mean, you can present a bottle of champagne to your friends, for example, decorated like this. Besides, if you make a bottom a bit different, it can be a nice decoration for a gift for kids too. Especially if you make a Christmas tree bright like this. I've tried different options in search of a perfect shape. I believe I have managed to find it, so today I'm sharing it with you. In the process of my experiments, a lot of different Christmas trees have been made. As for this one, my daughter says it looks rather like a magician's hat than a Christmas tree. But you know that only trial and error can bring some fruit. So I will share my failures with you to help you avoid them. In order to weave a Christmas tree, I propose you the following. At first I made such a base, filled it with crumpled paper, fixed it with sticky tape. But for some reason I found it inconvenient to weave based on this form. So I've decided to simplify the task and try weaving with the help of barbecue skewers. I like the second option more. Well, it's up to you to choose. I'm going to show you the technique I personally prefer. So I've printed a circle, divided into 16 segments, and pierced 16 holes. I will share the link to make it easier for you. You can just download the scheme. So I've tried experimenting with circles of smaller and bigger diameter. Finally, I've chosen the circle of about 16 centimeters, about 6.5 inches. So I've glued the paper circle onto a round piece of cardboard, pierced the holes, lengthened the tubes. They were short, so I've lengthened them beforehand. Now the first stage is leading the tubes through the holes. I leave a tail unengaged in order to hide them into the cloth later. So I've got 16 tubes. You will see later why I use 16 tubes. I'm going to take part of them out later, so you'll understand why 16 is a perfect number. So insert all the 16 tubes, leaving the tails, and shape them like this. So, I've inclined the tubes toward the center, tapered. Put a can inside. Well, you can use any other base for this purpose. It's up to you. Take into account that the taller you'd like your Christmas tree to be, the higher the base you use should be. I'd like my Christmas tree to be about as tall as this one, so this base is quite sufficient. Our current task is fixing the poles, so I weave 4 or 5 rows in the technique of 3-tube rope, directing the poles upward. I'm going to weave 2 or 3 rows, after which I'll lengthen the poles with barbecue skewers. So far there's nowhere to insert a skewer, so let's weave about 3 rows at first. Lengthen the tube and continue weaving in the normal 3-tube rope technique. Let me show you the way I transfer. Many of you already know how to transfer smoothly. I'm very grateful to Svetlana, who has explained how to make this smooth transition in every detail. I will share the link. I was very glad to find such a detailed explanation. Thanks a lot to Svetlana. She has helped me to understand it much better. So, I mark the first tube. You can do it any way you like. For example, tie a piece of some colorful thread. Now, when I've reached this first tube, you don't weave a normal rope, but instead you lead the first tube in front of 2 poles and behind the third one, the second tube in front of 2 behind the next pole, and the third tube in front of 2 behind the next. As a result, I've got a very smooth row. Then you continue weaving a normal 3-tube rope the way you did before, until you reach the first row again and perform a smooth transition again. After 3 rows have been woven, I've got space where to insert barbecue skewers already. I join a skewer into each pole. I've tried using doubled poles in order to do without any rigid skewers. However, this very pattern is rather specific. It tightens the weaving and spoils the shape if used without skewers. That's why I've decided to use skewers. They help me to keep the shape smooth all along. Moreover, don't take the skewers off too early. Once I've woven part of the item and taken the skewers out, the top has gotten deformed and made the Christmas tree look like a magician's hat. Do you remember? If you keep the skewers in until you finish weaving, your Christmas tree will be smooth like this. I'm quite satisfied with this shape. So, I've inserted the skewers, woven 3 rows, now the next step is shaping loops. I've lengthened the tubes beforehand. Here is the first pole, let's hug it with a loop. As for 3-tube rope, I've just cut the remainders off. I'm going to press it with the next row, which will keep it from unweaving. So, hug every other pole with a loop. It is very convenient to hide the point of lengthening here. Take a look, please. I bend a tube, and the point of lengthening is hidden behind the joint. I bend the tube and lead it here. Well, actually, you must be familiar with the pattern. There is such a peculiarity in the first row. While shaping the first knot, don't tie the second half of the knot so far. You will see why by the end of the row. So far, tie only the first half of the knot. Further, you perform all the normal steps. Lead the tube behind the right pole at first and under the central one. Then turn around the left pole and lead behind the central one again. The first knot has been finished. Repeat all the same actions. Well, the pattern is well known. I'm showing the process to those who haven't tried it yet. Handles woven in this technique are very popular. Once again, the tubes have to be wet, otherwise the knots won't be smooth and neat. Continue this way until you reach the first knot again. So I've reached the knot I started with. It is when I perform the second part of interweaving. At the beginning of every row I perform the first half of the knot and the second half in the end of the row. Otherwise, if you weave in circle, you will get a kind of a gap here. In order to avoid this gap, you perform a bit different actions with the pole marked. The first half of the knot in the beginning and the second half at the end of the row. Apart from this, the main principle of this pattern is following a certain sequence. You always take the left tube first and lead it to the right. Make sure your wet tube has twisted and hugged the pole. Do your best to avoid unsmooth turns. The same here. If the tube is wet, you can smoothen the knots. Very carefully. Repeat all the same actions for this pole. Take the tube from the left, lead it to the right and under the central one. Pull it carefully to shape a nice twist. And continue in the same very way. One more peculiarity. Try to lengthen the tubes in such points where the joints will be hidden with the next twist. And make sure the poles are kept vertical and don't slide apart. As for skewers, I'm pulling them up gradually. Weave about 15-17 rows this way. When the intervals between the poles become too small and it is inconvenient to weave further, I just cut the working tubes off and continue weaving a few following rows in the 3-tube rope technique. At this stage, you can take every other skewer out. So continue. Weave a 3-tube rope in the same very way as you started. So, 3 rows of ropes have been woven. Cut the working tubes hidden behind the poles off. Now, to be able to continue weaving further, cut every other pole off. I press the cloth downward a little with the help of scissors and cut. Afterwards, you can pull the walls a bit higher and the stumps will get hidden. Now, in the same way, I continue weaving the same pattern on 8 poles instead of 16. This way, I enlarge the intervals between the poles artificially by cutting every other pole. And once again, weave the same pattern on 8 poles. Please take notice that we don't take skewers out, we keep them in as long as weaving is possible. In the same way, I start with the first half of the knot and weave the pattern you're already familiar with. Pressing the working tubes down carefully. Make sure the poles are straight. Don't take the skewers out. It is a bit more difficult here since the poles and the skewers meet. One more knot. In order to avoid a roundish top, so take a look please, I finish the second half of the first knot and continue weaving. In order to avoid a roundish top, you have to make about 5-7 knots here. And make sure the skewers help you keep the shape. To understand what I'm talking about, please take a look. Here I've taken the skewers out too early, which has spoiled the shape. That's why, while weaving the following items, I've done my best to keep the skewers in as long as possible in order to make the top high and sharp. So I've cut the tube ends off again. Take the skewers out. It is impossible to continue weaving with them. Well, actually I don't need them anymore. Once again, strengthen the structure with 2-3 rows of 3-tube rope. And the only thing left will be finished. It is too inconvenient to weave with no skewers at all, so I've inserted 2 skewers to keep the mark. I believe I won't be able to weave 3 rows. Let's weave at least 2 rows. Well, it depends. Maybe you have bigger intervals between the poles and you will be able to weave 3 rows. As for me, I see that I cannot continue. That's why I finish my 3-tube rope in a traditional way. finish the rope. Take the remaining skewers out. The only thing left is to wrap the top. One more point. In order to get a coil at the top, I've inserted a long piece of wire into one of the poles. And now I lengthen the tube onto the wire. I've dropped some glue so it will get fastened. Now I cut some of the poles off. Not all of them, part of them. I finish in a normal wrapping technique up to the very top. At the very top, you transform wrapping into a spiral. When you've reached the very top, you can shape a loop in order to be able to hook some decoration to the top of your Christmas tree. I've covered the end with some universal polymeric adhesive. Well, I'll spread some more glue afterwards. With some school glue you can make the loop rigid. So far, let's use a closing clip. Then, with the help of a glue syringe or some tube, shape such a spiral. You can stretch it as much as you like. You can hook some small decoration onto the loop. Unfortunately, I failed to find any decoration small enough. Now turn the item over, take the base out. I estimate the tube tail's length, shape the angles and cut the remainders. Then I drop glue into the gaps and tuck the tube tails in with the help of a skewer. Well, it's quite easy. The intervals between the tubes are rather big. That's why there is no problem inserting the tubes. Everything fits in perfectly. A skewer is much helpful. It is the way the upper part of Christmas tree looks. In the second part of the tutorial, I will tell you a few words about peculiarities of the bottom for a bottle and for a children's basket.